Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review, the digitally digested segment for the Sony CyberShot DSC RX10 Mark II. Priced at $1,300 US, this is the successor to the RX10 that I covered last year. Key difference being that this camera has a backlit 1-inch sensor, new design, I'll talk about that a little bit later, has the ability to capture 4K video in 29-minute clips, a little under 30, 29:59. That's because it is not a camcorder, but definitely, I think, ideal for video shooters, but not perfect, and I'll get to that a little bit later when I address video directly. But for $1,300, you are getting a great sensor, great overall build quality, and a very good 24 to 200 millimeter piece of Carl Zeiss glass with a dedicated aperture ring. You see that right here, which you have the ability to turn off the click noise or tactile feel that you have on it for switching between still and video capture, which is a nice advantage that originated, at least with Sony, on the far more expensive RX1, which is still one of my favorite cameras. So oddly enough, of any camera to benefit, it's a $1,300 1-inch sensor, fixed though with a very solid piece of glass. And that's really what you're paying for here besides build quality, because it's trying to deliver essentially a replacement for your interchangeable lens camera of choice. I don't care if we're talking about mirrorless, digital SLR, whatever it is, micro four thirds. The idea is that Sony wants to give you one device that will do it all. And this does a fairly good job. I mean, similarly to the RX100 Mark IV, which is priced at $950, has a 24 to 70 millimeter piece of Zeiss glass. A difference, though, in terms of the actual aperture rating, 1.8 here, f2.8 across this entire range, which is still great for the fact that this is a zoom lens, something you don't really have, almost super zoom here, not quite super, but certainly more than you get with the compact RX100 that you can fit in your pocket, that 4th gen. But you also get weather sealing here. You also get a more robust OLED viewfinder here at the back with eye sensor. Of course, like all of Sony's cameras, essentially since the Konica Minolta brand came into play. 3-inch display, fully articulating screen. It doesn't come around. It's not touch sensitive, for those of you that are wondering. On the left side of the camera, we have a microphone and headphone jack, something that is key for those of you looking to really be more flexible with the device you're using. And I do think that this camera does deliver a great output both in still and video, which is exactly what it's aimed at doing. Now, whether or not it's going to be a better option than an interchangeable lens camera that you might be considering for the same amount of money is something I'll address later, because that is a little bit more complicated than a basic overall review. Clean HDMI out for those of you who are interested in capturing, and your micro USB or multi-port, as Sony dubs it, for charging and additional accessories. On the other side of the camera, we have our SD card slot. You're going to want to use something that is fast for this camera. So UHS 3 card is what you're really after. You need a high write speed, because if you plan on capturing any UHD video, which this can do in XAVC-S codec, Sony's own codec, which is editable. Some users complain about it, but quite frankly, in a world where not everything plays nicely with general software, at least this does. And the output is great because you do have a 1-inch sensor, perfect for 4K video, UHD, paired with, again, very good glass. Now, the Zeiss lens on here, I have to say, some users have said it's questionable if it's the exact same lens as the previous gen. They feel that it is a step down or a step backwards in terms of the evolution of the RX10, and I understand why, and I'll also address that a little bit later when I talk about actual image and still video. I still think it's very good. Do I think it's as good as last gen? Possibly. It's a little bit less in terms of build material quality, I would say, because on the zoom I do get a bit of a bump halfway through there, and you can see it in the video, and it doesn't add to already an image stabilization system that unfortunately is one of the Achilles of this product. So even though this does give you a great blend of both still and video in a form factor that is smaller still than what you might be using in your interchangeable option world of what you might purchase or are already using and want to ditch in favor of this convenient option, I would call it, it is going to be questionable what that trade-off is and what you're willing to give up. Now, the camera from that stacked DRAM 1-inch sensor redesign benefits. I mentioned that you get an high-speed photography now, So slow motion is a capability up to 960 frames per second, and it claims 1080p, but you're really getting something far lower in resolution. So I want you to know that in advance. By the way, up here at the top, I didn't mention, but rudimentary, I should still. Customizable button, exposure comp right here, your power switch. The camera does power on fairly fast. Your zoom rocker right here, but you can also, for those of you that are wondering, use this to zoom as well. Something that some people fail to realize is that you can customize this on both Sony's RX100 line and, of course, here in the RX10 line, both the original version as well as this one, to assign this to either be focus or zoom. So that's very easy to do in the menus. Beyond that, we have our actual mode dial on the left side, which gives you quick access to, in this case, I have it set to video, something I've been testing a lot with this because it is a strong suit of the RX10 Mark II. But then you have your scene mode, your panorama, manual presets, basically everything you'd expect from your mode dial. A hot shoe right here at the center top, your microphone array, your flash. And the flash is solid, but, it's a bridge camera, and that's what you have to remember. The idea here is that you do have a hot shoe if you require something a little bit more powerful, but I feel that the flash does a fairly good job in most situations. Again, one of my favorite elements is the aperture ring. It's just something that more cameras should have. This camera also has neutral density filters built in, something you're not going to find with many other bridge cameras. Really, the chief competition for this isn't out yet, and that would be the update to the FZ1000, presumably the FZ2000 from Panasonic, which I anticipate will be a great camera, just like the original FZ1000. Now, when you're shooting with this, one of the other elements beyond high-speed shooting, and I didn't mention where that's really the sweet spot there, is on the 120 frames per second at 1080p, because you're legitimately getting 1080p, or the 240, where you're getting very close to 1080p. So that's really the sweet spot on the high speed, but I do feel the high speed or slow motion is a gimmick on this camera. It's not something I need. I think it's not something that I would say vast majority of people willing to throw the money into a bridge style camera like this are after, but it's good to have. I can't complain about it being present. But here you see what a traditional screen looks like in one of the modes. And basically you can see we've got the audio channel readout, something that if you are monitoring, definitely good to have on screen, and basically everything else that's going on here right now actively. You can see we are shooting in right now 4K at 30p, as I mentioned, in XAVC-S, and that's at the highest bit rate, which you can see right there is 100 as the screen goes off, of course, because the camera's putting itself to sleep. Let's wake it back up. You'll see how quickly it wakes. I want to show you some of these menus. So the menu button located right here on the left-hand side. The Wi-Fi and NFC are definitely a nice thing to have on board a camera like this, but I will tell you in advance that just like Sony's top-of-the-line A7R, I wish the Wi-Fi chipsets were better. That is something where it's more like it's there just to be there rather than that it's the best performer in the business. But if that's one of the shortcomings of any camera, it's the thing I'm least worried about. It is a convenient feature, and I'll talk about how you can use it with this camera, specifically the applications and what that experience is like. In terms of images, I said 20 megapixel sensor. You can see right there the options, your aspect ratio options as well. In terms of quality, right now, we're set automatically to fine. You can see it's grayed out because we're in video. That's what you have to remember. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to, let's say, auto, which some people live in, especially on a camera like this. And I stress that because even though this is for really more prosumer, true hobbyist enthusiasts, I feel like this is something a beginner can pick up with and get great results, which is what the RX line is all about. Really someone who just wants the best possible quality in the smallest form factor. And that's what this camera does in many senses, much like its sibling, the RX100 Mark IV. So when we're inside the menu, again, now you can see we have control of that quality. And I tend to shoot in RAW and JPEG combo. You can go with extra fine if you want to avoid RAW altogether. But the difference between fine and extra fine is not that big of a jump. So I find I'm better off shooting in the RAW and JPEG combo. Whether or not this camera is going to see Sony's brand new announcement for the A7R Mark II and A7S Mark II of a uncompressed RAW mode is questionable. I doubt it, but hey, if it happens, great for RX10 Mark II owners. In terms of other features, fairly straightforward what they've done here. I told you before we're shooting at 100 megabits per second. You can step it down. This camera will not overheat shooting 4K video, so as long as you've got batteries and SD cards, you can keep going. And by batteries, I don't just mean the physical battery that it comes with stock, which averages, I would say, close to 300 shots on a single charge. Mixed, of course, you're going to get a different lifespan, but it does fairly well on video, much better than my A7R Mark II. That battery isn't your only source. You can also charge it via USB. So you can use a traditional USB charge pack that will output to micro USB and extend your life or keep your camera topped off while it's in your bag. A benefit to all of Sony's micro USB based charging cameras, which is virtually all of them. Dual record does exist. Keep in mind, if you use this, it's going to take 720p, 1280 by 720p captures of whatever you're filming in UHD at the time. I think it's nice to have. It gives really just shareable small images. Some people were hoping it would do what the original FDR AX100 did, which was give a true still image, not quite the 1-inch sensor's capability, but very close to that, and definitely much higher res images than what we're seeing out of this. For some reason, Sony decided to kill that feature. I do miss it, but you've got to remember this is a still camera first. Now, when you're in high-speed recording, you notice right there, you've got your range in terms of format and bit rate. In addition to that, you have your actual frame rate. You can see I've got this set to 240. Now, I mentioned even if you go to 960, it's still going to show you that you've got that 60p 50 megabits option. However, it's really not. It's just Sony up converting. So stick with the 240, or even, as I mentioned before, in regular video quality, use the 120 frames. That's another good option. And it is a nice feature, but again, much more of a gimmick than a true, I would say, selling point of what this camera is really after in terms of its market. The drive mode, continuous shooting, obviously going to yield inferior results to single shots, but 14 frames per second with continuous autofocus, because that's another enhancement from this new sensor design. We do have a much faster camera, not quite as fast as the RX100, but that has to do with the speed of the lens, not just the autofocus system and the actual sensor and its design. But this backlit sensor does slightly outperform last year's model. Now, I mentioned the lens being slightly inferior. That's because I'm getting a bump through the zoom range. The drive speeds have changed a little bit, not in a way that I would say compromises the camera system at all. That built-in neutral density filter, I can't stress enough how nice that is to have on board, something that you will miss if you do not have it. I also mentioned the Panasonic FZ1000 and the FZ2000 that I would be comparing this to if it were out. Eventually it will be out, and that will be a killer camera, I'm sure, but I don't expect it to have the same build quality. And quite frankly, the fact, I'm bringing this up while I'm discussing lenses, that it also has a great lens, the original FZ1000, things do get really soft as you go out farther on that lens. And the same happens here. Even though we have a constant f2.8 across this entire 24 to 200 35mm equivalency, I have to tell you, once you get past 100, things do get very soft. And unless you have incredible light, even with that f2.8, it's just not going to yield results, at least that make me happy as someone who is accustomed to shooting with full-frame APS-C interchangeable lens cameras. Now, for someone else who lives in auto, or just, I'm going to give other customer types, this isn't the only customer this camera is good for, but for someone who really isn't learning how to use their interchangeable lens camera, let me put it that way, but tends to shoot in auto, I think that this is a brilliant device. I think it's going to get them a lot more keepers, which at the end of the day yields a better purchase, dollar for dollar, for them to spend their money on. And the same applies to the RX100 line. Even though they're expensive cameras, I know so many people that are amazed by the results they get. They actually think they're great photographers, and they're living in auto. And that is one of the beautiful things Sony has done with their entire RX lineup. After all, it is part of the CyberShot family for a reason. But that doesn't mean advanced users can't take joy in this sensor lens pairing. Nirvana that Sony's been cranking out ever since the first RX100 made a shockwave through the industry. And then, of course, the RX10, RX1. I mean, I can only hope that eventually we're going to see something like the RX1 reborn with, at least a new prime lens, or maybe even a fast f2.8 zoom lens. and far more capabilities. I mean, that would be my camera of choice. And that's what would really be the step above this, and I'm hoping that we see that one day, but who knows? At any rate, that's just wishful thinking on my behalf. Steady shot is something I want to talk about because I was just discussing how the lens is a weakness, no question about it, and that's to be expected when you're dealing with a fixed zoom being built onto a camera, even if it's one of the best you can get your hands on. And the news here is that steady shot works but doesn't do a great job. If you look at some of the samples that I have on my channel, which I will put a link into the playlist, you will see that there is quite a bit of stutter on these shots. And I'm not shooting any differently than I would handheld with any other UHD camera that has stabilization. And of course, stabilization does erode image quality, video quality a little bit. So for the trade-off, you expect to get steady shots. Unfortunately, I'm finding that most of the video on here, while it looks great, it needs to be stabilized to more of a degree. In other words, you have to have some kind of stabilization system, monopod, tripod, whatever it is. And that is something that I wish I didn't have to talk to all of you about, but I do, because it is an issue with this camera. So that's something else I wanted to point out. It is a drawback for me personally, something where I thought this would be really a run-and-gun go-to for video. I can't, without stabilization, confidently use this, even though it doesn't have an overheating problem. That actually is a bigger rub for me, even with the greater battery life that it has than much of the competition shooting. Well, not Panasonic, because, well, the FZ1000 does do better there, but who knows what the FZ2000 will do. The LX100, not a proper comparison. It doesn't have the zoom lens that this has, even though it does have a larger sensor and 4K video internal capture. But everything is here that you would expect. I mentioned... Well, I didn't mention the silent shutter. You can shoot with this thing completely silently, which I love. That's another element of the RX lineup that is fantastic, and I wish I saw on more cameras. The A7R Mark II does have a similar system in place, but it's not really similar. It's just capable of the silent mode, which is great. Another thing, face registration is more novelty, but face recognition is solid on this camera. Autofocus, as I mentioned, much improved, not just the speed, but the actual focus itself for both still and video subjects. So that's really important if you're trying to shoot fast-moving things, children, animals, whatever it may be, you're going to do well here. And that's what it should do. It is a bridge-style camera trying to accomplish everything that a gear bag traditionally would, make it so that you could just take this on vacation and you're done, or on your next trip, camping trip, whatever it may be. Disney, I don't know, but you could really take this anywhere and be done as long as you have enough batteries and SD cards, or just a really large one, much like the RX100. I mean, that's really the theme here with both of these cameras. In terms of other things you should know, the applications, you will need to pay for some are free. The Wi-Fi control to use your iOS or Android phone to actually control this is free. Sending images to your phone or computer, also free. Convenient transfer, you can set that up. But this is where I would like a touch screen. It would also be helpful with focus during video and still capture, but that's not a make or break feature for me in any way, because no one else is making anything like this. The weather seal, I can't stress enough how important that is. It's not a waterproofing, but from a resistance standpoint, great for both consumers, general consumers, and professionals alike. The actual application market, on the other hand, is something that has grown quite a bit. Right now, my personal favorite apps are the video grading app as well as the time-lapse app. Both are pay-for-play. However, they do actually yield significant results, in my opinion, when you compare it to what you can do with the camera on its own without having to connect it to a PC. So to have time-lapse, which, yes, with Panasonic is free, here you pay for it, but Sony has built a network of applications, and hopefully that development will open up and continue to grow. It has over the years, and I think it still has a lot of potential. In terms of other applications, they're out there, direct upload, different effects, visual effects that you can add to the stills you've taken, but those really two are the time-lapse and the video grading are my favorites out of the bunch, so I mentioned them in passing. But Wi-Fi, again, on here is not what I wish it could be. It seems like Wi-Fi is the one thing Sony hasn't improved the performance of across any of the generations of their cameras since their very first Wi-Fi enabled camera, which is sad. And by that I mean Sirius camera, which was the NEX 6, the 5R. Things just have not bumped up from there. It seems like they're using the same Wi-Fi chipset. Wish they would implement something new, just like I wish USB 3.0 was on here, but that's not a big deal either, much like the Wi-Fi is not a big deal because you need a fast SD card to shoot with this, to clear the buffer that this has the speed of capability, speed to actually push out. If you want to shoot successive raw stills, you can do it if you've got an SD card that can keep up. So that's a great advantage, something you would traditionally expect from an interchangeable lens camera, but it lives here in the RX10 Mark II. Now, in terms of other things you should know, of course, like all Sony cameras, you can bump up the brightness of the display here as well when you're out in sunny conditions, but you do have the OLED EVF, and it is really good. Now, it's not as good as what you'll find on the brand new A7R Mark II and the A7S Mark II because those are pro-grade cameras. However, when it comes to bridge-style cameras, you will not beat this OLED EVF, so that's another thing that's really important, and I love the actual design, where it is. You're not going to press your face into the camera. I do wish they gave a little bit more coverage on the rubber here, but otherwise, no real complaints. Love the layout of the video button. Wish the video button was here on all of Sony's cameras, but unfortunately, it's a CyberShot design. You're not going to find this on any of the Alpha full frame or APS-C cameras that Sony makes. The video button lives over here. Basically, as I mentioned before, all the same design here, layout that you have seen on previous models, so no real changes. I mean, this camera really is identical to the original RX10. The key differences being that you do have that 4K video, which won't overheat, higher speed autofocus, as I mentioned earlier, the slow motion or high speed video recording capability, which, as I said, you really want to stick to 240. You know, you don't want to push it beyond that by too much because you're just going to lose image quality. It's going to be, yes, you'll have that literal frame rate, even the 960, but if it's not worth watching, then what good is bragging? I don't see the utility in that. Beyond the fact that, as I've mentioned multiple times through the video, I don't see a huge benefit to the feature at all. But the buffering and the high-speed autofocus upgrade from the previous gen is tremendous. And then most importantly is that UHD element, because this camera, the original RX10, was heralded as one of the best options for videographers as a B camera or even an all-in-one to take with them and shoot with. And I just see the fact that you're going to need stabilization for 4K. The lens seems to have somewhat less, I mean, still has that Zeiss character, don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't seem to perform as well. I told you it's got the 2 zoom setting modes. In terms, for those of you wondering, 62mm thread there. I do have the lens hood on right now. I can easily remove that, just for those of you curious, see what it looks like without that. And everything works as it should. It just, at the end of the day, it really comes down to what you're looking for in terms of balance. If you need the extra zoom that the FZ1000 from Panasonic has to offer, you should probably be waiting for the update on that camera or invest your money in that one and save a lot compared to this. It's about half the price of this camera. The reality is, if you don't need that zoom, you're getting a better lens here, and in my opinion, it's almost the same sensor, except this is now a new sensor. Of course, if still is your only interest, you should probably be looking at the original RX10 because it does shoot great 1080p video, but it doesn't have the UHD, the 4K capability, or the high-speed slow-mo that I've been mentioning. Weather sealing was still on the first gen. The build quality was the same, the button layout the same. And as I mentioned, the lens may be slightly better, but I don't think it's that things materially changed. It may just be this generation build. I can't really peg it. It's just, it doesn't have the exact same performance, but it's really, really close. So that's one reason I can't say, oh, it's inferior, and I can't recommend the camera as a result. I do think, I mentioned earlier, that the RX100 fares better in many situations simply because I do think the smaller 24-70, more focused, and faster piece of glass here does better with the sensor than this lens. And maybe that is why Sony made it f2.8 constant, because otherwise, well, you'd get results like you get out of the FZ1000, which are often far from desirable. And I know, as I mentioned earlier, that Sony's whole goal with this product line is to produce keepers for shooters that are both entry and pro alike, without much work or with as much customization and manual control as you want. And that's the beauty of this. Flexibility, great still, great video output, and really compact form factor. The batteries aren't expensive anymore. You can go with third party, as I mentioned, and you get quick access to basically everything, whatever it may be that you need in any respective mode that you're actually living in. You do have quick access to that. You can customize things. A lot of people complain about the Sony menu system, but I think every user, that whether they're living in a Canon, Nikon, Olympus world, Panasonic, they all know that all of their cameras have quirks, so it's a matter of just what you're accustomed to. And I think most Sony users, they know what needs to be improved, but they're also accustomed to the menus. People that aren't come in and say, wow, this is confusing, it's cluttered, the order is off. So I think critique needs to be taken with a grain of salt, and context is key. Let me put it that way. If you're a Sony user, you know what to anticipate in a camera like this, especially if you were upgrading from the RX10 or an older model that has a similar menu system. But overall, the camera does a great job. Now, when it comes to the dedicated videographer, as I mentioned before, I think this is an incredible value. You're getting a great 1-inch sensor, a great still camera, 4K video, and really just better overall performance than you would get out of the original RX10. Yes, you're spending more money, but you are definitely future-proofed in a way you are not with the original RX10, which does not have the UHD video. I'll take out even the new sensor design, backlit element, as well as the high-speed slow-motion photography. So just from the 4K standpoint, especially since the RX10 originally was all about what great video it surprisingly yielded, this camera, it's almost as if Sony realized they had outdone themselves, and I'm not going to say took a step backwards, but tried to make the video very good, but it's not quite as stunning. Even though the 4K looks great, like I said, you have a little bit of stability issues, which you're going to need to offset in one way or another, so be prepared for that. But once you do that, the video quality, especially if you're on tripod, stabilization off, looks amazing. Is it as good as the FZ1000? I would say absolutely, if not better. If you compare it to something like the FDR AX100 I'm filming on now, still not as good, and understandably so, even though those can be found heavily discounted now. Completely different form factor. It's a camcorder, not a still camera. And there's a reason Sony hasn't updated it in 2 years. I expect at CES we're going to see the next generation of the FDR AX100 that I film on, and I'll likely want to pick it up unless it somehow doesn't blow away the quality that this camcorder is capable of right now. But to compare them is really silly, even though I've already done that in a sense right now, because one is a camcorder, one is a still camera that just happens to be a hybrid. The pricing, though, is what brings people to making these sorts of comparisons. Now, if you compare this to basically anything else in the segment, it doesn't have the UHD video or the quality of this glass built in on a fixed lens point-and-shoot experience. It's just as simple as that. That's why I keep mentioning Panasonic, really the only competition, and they've done an amazing job. They actually are the ones who pushed the envelope on 4K, and that's why Sony's original RX10 took a steep drop in price as soon as that camera launched, because it was less expensive than it and more feature-rich, more lens reach. So Sony had to take inventory. I feel like this is really what we should have gotten on the original RX10. I think that those of you who wish these features were there will probably think they're worth upgrading for. Will the camera come down in price? Of course. How long will that take? I'm not sure. But that all really remains to be seen based on the reception by all of you and sales. For me personally, the shake that I get with video is enough. It didn't exist with the 1080p. It's just a difference in maybe keeping the same stabilization system, but bringing in 4K video, which really requires a steadier hand. And I'm not trying to be cute, but when it comes to stabilization. You need more than what is on board here. And even though the RX100 Mark IV seems to work with the same stabilization system, it does not have the same stability issues. It definitely has some form of micro stutter, but not as much jitter as I get with the RX10 Mark II. And that could just be a matter of weight distribution, having the same stabilization system. And I'm not saying Sony has to put the 5-axis in here, but I would pay more to have it, because the A7R Mark II, the stabilization is night and day compared to this product. I think that, I'm not going to say that's intentional, but the price points do definitely tell you something. I mean, one is $1,300, the other is $3,200. So I can't really begin to compare those for that reason alone. Forget sensor size, interchangeable lens, all of those things. The RX10 Mark II does exactly what you expect it to do, which is deliver best-in-class results for still and video, something that nothing else right now in its class can do exactly like it. In time, I'm sure Panasonic will come out with something that will be a great competitor. I've mentioned this over and over again, because if you're on the fence, it probably isn't that far away. But considering I haven't even seen or heard a rumor yet, we've got nothing tangible to go on. So if you need a camera now, I really don't feel that you're going to see an incredible price drop on this, although Pani will probably bring out their comparable product at around the $1,000 price point and still undercut Sony, maybe come in around the same, but I think they'll still be below them just like they were last time around. They can't do that much more when it comes to features. They have better stabilization, something I wish that we had here, and they do have an fully articulating screen for self-portrait, but otherwise I can't see them doing a whole lot more, because that extra 200 millimeters of lens is really more about paper specification than real-world use in my experience. As much as I enjoyed that camera, things just got really bad. You had to be on a tripod to get, in my opinion, solid results and have perfect lighting, because that doesn't have the f2.8 across the lens. So I still think this is a great option for videographers, especially if they're going to go with 1080p content. You know, that's not something I touched on. XAVCS 1080p, still great quality, some best-in-class footage going to come out of this sensor and lens pairing. But will it be just as good on the original RX10? Slightly inferior. Maybe a little bit better, depending on how you look at the lens, because I may just have a bad sample here, and other people may have lens performance that's perfectly adequate, if not excellent. And I want to make that point as well, because this isn't something that I've seen as a uniform complaint across every RX10 Mark II owner, but that could also be because not everyone owned the first gen one, let alone spent time with it or even held it to know that there is a variation or difference. But overall, I definitely can recommend this camera, again, to entry-level users who want to learn. This is a great learning tool for your hobby. To advanced users that even make a living, again, doing video work, I think this is easily a great B or C camera for video. I feel like it takes too much compensation, again, but for some users it won't, and it will be an A camera. I think photojournalists will love this, again, with the right lighting. It really is a very versatile tool at a price that, even if in a year there is a new model, you won't be regretting it, because there isn't so much more. Even though Sony has been pulling a lot of tricks out of their bag lately, there isn't a whole lot more that they can offer right now until we get to an 8K world when it comes to video, which is some time off from now. Since 4K is just finally starting to get its teeth into just about everything. And even if you right now don't think you need 4K, trust me, better to future-proof. You'll be glad when you eventually do own a 4K TV and can look back at your memories and say, wow, the quality is there. It puts me back there. I experienced this, with 720p and 1080p being an early adopter. 4K is no different. You will thank yourself later. So even if you don't own it, I'll always recommend it if you care about what you're capturing. That's just whether for profit or for personal. It's just a matter of getting the best image that you can get across both still and video. So the RX10 does accomplish that. There are some caveats. I wish it had better battery life. I wish that it had better stabilization. But if those are two of the biggest complaints really that I have, because I mentioned the issues with Wi-Fi, which aren't really issues, but more of common practice for all camera manufacturers. None of them have fantastic Wi-Fi performance. Samsung has pushed the envelope a lot there, but they don't make a competing product, so I can't really compare anything but interchangeable lens cameras, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because even though the camera itself, the body might be inexpensive, like I have the A6000 right here, which is a great camera, you're going to need glass for this, and that's where things are going to get expensive. I mean, the lens on here, this wide angle 10 to 18 mil APS-C E-mount lens is already, I mean, originally I think it was a $900 lens, and I think now on sale you're looking at $800. It could still be $900. I don't follow pricing on it, but I've loved it since it came out. The whole point is that you're almost at the price of this camera, and you don't have the same experience you're going to get with this range. You don't have the 4K video. You don't have that high-speed photography for slow-mo. You don't have, even with this camera, 11 frames per second autofocus. You do not have the 14 frames you're getting here. So, but you could make an argument that it's not as accurate because of the phase detection. So, I mean, once you get into interchangeable arguments, they kind of are all moot because the amount you have to spend on glass will already put you into another price bracket. Even if you're going for a value camera like the A6000 with a lot of kit glass, then I don't know. I mean, that's where APS-C and this start to become a very good comparison because, quite frankly, I think that this is the better option for many users, the majority that aren't going to get manual and really spend a lot on glass, than something like the A6000. And that was something else I wanted to touch on really briefly. You know, if you're considering the A6000, especially, it's getting cheaper now because we're just around the corner from an announcement of a successor, or at least that's word on the street, and it's time. I mean, it's definitely been long enough. You're going to see a faster focusing camera, a similar price point, probably a little bit more. I'm not expecting UHD video, so this will still be better in that element. But, you know, again, something that will work with APS-C lenses for the E-mount, adaptable for other legacy glass, and has a much bigger sensor, but no 4K video. I'm sure it will be better in every way when it comes to still photography than the RX10 Mark II, but when it comes to run and gun, not necessarily. And this is going to require as small a body as this is, and even if its successor is around the same size, you're still going to be looking at definitely more of a gear bag than you will with a single product like this, where everything, even the neutral density filter, is in-house. So hopefully this gives you all a fairly good idea. I know it was a lengthy video, but all of my full reviews are you know, the system in terms of software side, UI, I think is fine. Again, any Sony customer is accustomed to this by now and happy that they made the switch to this from their old ticky-tacky consumer interface that the CyberShot name used to carry. And then the sensor lens pairing, we already knew what to expect. It was the UHD side and the high speed where things were more of a question. The backlit sensor, like I said, minor improvement, and that's why I could still recommend the RX10 to those of you that are out there just for the still experience and great 1080p video. So both are great options. This is definitely the more expensive one because you can find the RX10 original gen now, I think for around $800 US, so a considerable price difference. And as I mentioned, the FZ1000, another great choice, but I would wait for the successor of the FZ1000 if you're not sold on what Sony has to deliver. But I really believe that the length of this lens is more than enough. You do have clear image zoom, but it's not great because you're only dealing with a 1-inch sensor. So your crop capability of being able to really zoom in on the detail of the image you've captured is limited by that sensor. If you were working with something like an APS-C sensor, maybe eventually Sony will graduate to an RX camera with an APS-C. That would be great. I'm more leaning towards hoping for a full frame, but I'll take either or. Then you've just got another class of product that, again, Sony has created, and if consumers do like it, which I think they would love it, you have created another segment that every manufacturer, or at least Panasonic, is going to acknowledge and try to beat Sony at. So a lot to like here. Hope you all enjoyed the video. I've pretty much given you every in and out angle that you could possibly have to worry about as a consumer and what to compare it to. Again, the interchangeable lens comparison will always happen, but the fact that glass creates a budget hole that this simply cannot match already, I think, again, negates that argument. And also, on top of that, The fact that you've got UHD video, something you won't get with all of those interchangeable bodies. Yes, some of them, the Samsung NX that I covered, the 500, you will get it, but not an XAVCS, and I'd much rather have it than an H.265, despite what anyone has to say. Yes, more efficient, but editing, not a pleasure cruise. The GH4, not going to compare it. I mean, I could go through all of the cameras. The RX10 Mark II accomplishes everything under one roof, something that until Panasonic updates the FZ1000, leaves it as the king of the hill of bridge cameras in every single way. Hope you all enjoyed the video. I definitely enjoyed shooting with the RX10 Mark II, and I think you will as well. Be sure to pick it up from a retailer with a solid, or I would say reputable, return policy like Amazon. I will include a link in the description. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.